Let's go back to Steve Rattner. He's made his way from the set over to the southwest wall with a fact check of some of recent claims President Trump made in that interview on Sunday with Kristen Welker on Meet the Press. So let's start here with your first chart. President Trump insisted during the interview, Steve, he already had gotten costs down in his first couple of months. Here's what he said.
I was able to get down the cost. Oil is down, gasoline is down, groceries are down, eggs. But you don't talk about the fact that gasoline is down at numbers that nobody believes possible. You know why they're down, by the way? Drill, baby, drill. We're drilling like crazy right now.
Steve, what do the numbers show?
Well, as usual, there's a lot to unpack here. Donald Trump has a loose relationship to the facts. So let's talk about prices, first of all. Prices are still going up. If you look at headline, meaning all items together in the Consumer Price Index, you'll see that they rose by 0.6% in the first 3 months of the Trump administration compared to 0.9% under the Biden administration. A little bit slower, but still significant price increases. Groceries went up faster under Trump than under Biden by 1% in that quarter, which is close to a 4% annual rate. 0.8 under Biden. I'm going to come back to gas in 1 second. But what's also happening that is very worrisome, and notwithstanding Trump's exhortations, shall we say, the public isn't really buying it. Inflationary expectations on the part of consumers have gone up enormously. They were 2.8% back in December, and now they're 6.5%. And sometimes perception becomes reality. And so this is a dangerous thing as well. Now, back to oil. Why are gasoline prices down? They're down for two reasons. One, because OPEC is pumping more oil, which brings prices down. And secondly, because when the oil market perceives that the economy, the biggest economy, ours, is weakening, then prices start, they expect demand to fall and prices start to fall. And the next thing that happens is people drill less oil, because if they don't think they're going to get the same price for their oil, they're going to drill less oil. So this notion that drill, baby, drill has created a whole upsurge in drilling activity is absolutely counter to the facts.
And then there's the point, of course, made during the campaign, by the Biden campaign, that no one in the history of human civilization had drilled more and taken more out of the ground in the last year than the Biden administration. So President Trump also made a claim during that interview on Meet the Press about how much money America lost every day on trade deficits under President Biden. Here's what he said.
We lost $5 to $6 billion a day with Biden. $5 to $6 billion. And I've got that down to a great number right now in a record time. You know, we're talking about 100 days. But just think of what that is. $5 billion a day we're losing on trade. What about the car business? They're going to make a fortune because of the tariffs.
Steve, the charts show the trade deficit is actually increasing right now.
Yeah, I'm not going to do a whole thing on how trade deficits work, but I'm going to do one simple thing, because he keeps saying we lost $5 billion a day. If I go downstairs in 30 Rock here and I buy a Morning Joe T-shirt for $20, I give them $20, I get a T-shirt. Have I lost money? No, I've gotten something back for my money. And that's, in effect, what we're doing. We're buying stuff from overseas. There are issues there, but it's not like we're just handing the Chinese $5 billion a day. And that's the wrong number, of course. In 2024, the trade deficit equaled $2.5 billion a day, so less than half of what Trump claimed Biden had done. Here's the Biden period here. Look what's happened under Trump. The trade deficit has soared, soared, soared. And I'm not saying that it's because of Trump, but what's been happening is people are importing a lot more to get ahead of the tariffs. And the result is now the trade deficit is about $5 billion a day. But he got the president wrong. That was under President Trump, not under President Biden. Now, as for the cars, he also said, as you just heard, that this is going to be the greatest thing ever for the car companies. They're going to make a fortune, and so on and so forth. It's not how the car companies feel, and it's not how the market feels. So let's look at how the market feels. These are the stocks of the Detroit three companies that used to be Chrysler, Ford, GM, and now Stellantis. And you can see that after the election, the stock prices kind of hung in there, up and down a little bit, but pretty stable. Since the election and since Liberation Day, which was right here, you can see what happened to the prices of all these shares. And why did that happen to their shares? Because the company started putting out announcements. Ford said that tariffs would reduce their earnings this year by $1.5 billion. General Motors said it's going to cost them $2 to $3 billion. And so it's a little bit hard to see why the car companies think this is a great thing, as Donald Trump claims.
And Ford announced this morning it's going to raise prices on 3 of its most popular cars because of these tariffs. Finally, Steve, President Trump dismissed the idea that economic uncertainty is on the rise and then doubled down on his plan to pass another tax cut. Here's what he said.
See,
Are these tariffs permanent?
I think there's only uncertainty in the fake news. We're trying to get approved right now the biggest tax cut in the history of our country. And if it doesn't get approved, it's a 68% tax increase, and that's what the Democrats want. They want a 68% tax increase. It's rather incredible.
Steve, what's he talking about there?
Well, God only knows, Willie. I couldn't figure out what he was talking about there because I can't replicate those numbers at all. What he's talking about is what would happen if his tax cut from 2017, which has to be extended, were allowed to expire, which would mean taxes would go up. But here's what they would go up by. Depending upon your income, they would go up by between $74 and $36,000. But for the people at the top, that's only a 6% tax increase. For the people at the bottom, it's an 18% tax rate. But there's no 68% numbers in here anywhere. It is made up. But I also have to say that President Biden's last tax proposal was to extend these tax cuts for everybody except the very, very rich. And so why Trump is claiming that the Democrats would have taxes go up is a mystery. And lastly, I think to sum up a lot of what we've been talking about, he also said, as you heard, that uncertainty is sort of a made-up fake news idea. Well, there are indices of uncertainty actually compiled from legislative progress on the Hill, what's going on here, news reports, things like that. And what you can see here, this index goes back to 1985 when it was first created, Economic Uncertainty Index. This is COVID. It obviously spiked up enormously. This is Trump 2.0. Holding second place now for creating economic uncertainty over the last 40 years. And in addition to that, more anecdotally, and you've seen a lot of this, you have company after company saying that they have to withdraw their earnings guidance this year. They can't predict what their earnings are going to be because life is so uncertain for them. Mattel, Skechers, Snap, Harley-Davidson, Alaska Airlines, UPS, and so forth. Company after company doing this because it is so uncertain. So to say we're not living in an uncertain time, I think is a gross misrepresentation of the truth.
So Steve, I want to cover tax cuts really quickly, and then we want to get to what the Fed said yesterday. But on tax cuts, any tax cuts, any new tax cuts, the extension of tax cuts, I will just say, going to be absolutely devastating when it comes to our fiscal health. We're already over, what, $37 trillion of possibility, the CBO has said, of the federal debt going up another $10 to $20 trillion over the next decade. That is unsustainable. It's something that I've been talking about now for 30 years. It's something you and I have been talking about on the show for 15 years. When spending continues to skyrocket, when the Pentagon budget continues to skyrocket, when the cost of entitlement programs continue to explode, when you're talking about giving tax cuts to billionaires and millionaires, these numbers don't add up. And we're talking about everything else except possibly the one thing that will take this country's economy to the cliff. Talk about that for a minute.
Joe, we are headed, no one, of course, knows exactly what Congress is going to do, but when you look at all the various proposals and things that are out there, we are headed for the worst damage that we have probably ever done to our fiscal situation. The Republicans are determined to pass a humongous tax bill, $4 trillion at least, maybe more. Remember, Trump made a lot of promises during the campaign about not taxing overtime, not taxing tips, all this stuff. So they're going to have to deal with that. But they're going to pass a massive tax bill. And as on present course and speed, any kind of spending reductions or spending constraints are going to be really minimal. The Republicans' margins in both the House and the Senate are so tight that when you have someone like a Josh Hawley say, I don't want to cut Medicaid, makes it really hard to get the votes to cut Medicaid. And that's the way this process is working. And so you right now have a huge tax cut sitting up there and virtually nothing to be done on the spending side except increase spending for things like defense that we all agree we probably need to do that.
So meanwhile, as expected, the Federal Reserve is holding interest rates steady at the level they've been at since December. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said several times yesterday the central bank is in a wait-and-see mode.
If the large increases in tariffs that have been announced are sustained, they're likely to generate a rise in inflation, a slowdown in economic growth, and an increase in unemployment. Look at the state of the economy. The labor market is solid. Inflation is low. We can afford to be patient as things unfold. There's no real cost to our waiting at this point.
So, Steve Rattner, this seems like a repeat of what we've been saying over the past 4 years, where the Fed continued to raise interest rates. They kept waiting for the economy to slow down. We expected a hard landing. We expected it, not just you and me. I mean, all of Wall Street, the banks expected a recession. Then we heard about the possibility of a soft landing. Then after the tariffs and the disruption, everybody started predicting a hard landing again. If you listen to Jerome Powell yesterday, he's saying, you know, there are a lot of indicators that things are going in a bad direction, but this economy still is resilient. We're going to have to wait and see. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Joe. We did much better these last few years than any of us would have thought. This still is an amazing economy that can just keep growing through a lot of uncertainty and a lot of factors that would bring down many other economies. But now Jerome Powell is in a tough spot because he's promised 2% inflation. Inflation today is running at roughly 3% and perhaps going up based on the tariffs and so on and so forth. The tariffs, as we've talked many times, will slow down, and Powell said it yesterday, will not only add to inflation, they will slow down growth. They will lead to fewer jobs. That's what he said. Not me, Jerome Powell, but I happen to agree with that. And that's going to put the Fed in a really difficult position. Trump is beating the bejesus out of them to cut interest rates, but Powell has committed to get to 2% inflation, and he can't really cut interest rates until inflation comes down, but inflation may well be going up. So the Fed is really in a tough spot as to how to handle this. And there's another word for that scenario, which I just outlined, and which frankly Powell kind of outlined, which is called stagflation. And that may be where we're headed. Not like the 1980s, but a situation where we have higher inflation, less growth, and interest rates don't go down as fast as people would like.
And just moments ago, President Trump really continuing to pound the bejesus out of the Fed, taking to Truth Social to write, "Too late." This is the nickname for Jerome Powell. "Too late, Jerome Powell is a fool who doesn't have a clue. Other than that, I like him very much." And he goes on to say some things that are not true about prices going down and no inflation, tariff money pouring in. But he ends by saying what's happening here is the exact opposite of too late and urges again the Federal Reserve to cut rates. So there's real pressure from the White House.
Quoting again Chairman Powell yesterday, he said if the large increase in tariffs that have been announced are sustained, they're likely to generate a rise in inflation, a slowdown in economic growth, and an increase in unemployment. That's from the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner. A very, very busy morning. We appreciate you, but especially today, Steve. Thanks so much.